Welcome, everybody. I'm Claire Robinson, and I am the Director of Special Events at RISD and Institutional Engagement, and one of the people who is working on this week of digital events for RISD Weekend. So I want to say welcome and welcome to our event today, which is Work in Process, Acquisitions and Reuniting Histories. And I wanted to thank Emily Banas and Laurie Brewer for joining us today to talk about how curators decide what objects to bring into the museum's collection and reuniting the history of items that have been there for a while. So thank you both for joining us today. And I want to thank the RISD Museum for partnering with us on this piece of programming. The museum, I'm just going to read you a little bit about the museum if you don't know, and refresh you if you do. It was established in 1877 alongside the college, and it stewards works of art representing diverse cultures from ancient times to the present. The collection contains more than 100,000 works of art and design, including paintings, sculpture, costume and textiles, and decorative arts from all over the world. While the galleries are currently open exclusively for the RISD community, online resources support academic institutions such as Brown University and people worldwide. Virtual programs, digital publications, audio and video content, along with research and writings by curators, RISD students and faculty are available for you to explore at risdmuseum.org. And my colleague Mariam is going to be posting links in the chat. So I really do strongly encourage you to check out the site because there is a lot of content there for you to explore digitally, and it's very, very rich. And also they are doing a wonderful slate of virtual programs. I know that Emily and Laurie have been doing them. Next week, Ways of Looking, a guided close looking session, focuses on a Japanese print. It's scheduled for the evening of October 15th. A RISD graduate student leads a hands-on experience called Back to the Drawing Board about childhood memories in drawing for the afternoon of October 18th. And for more details and registration, visit the museum's event page, which is also in the chat, risdmuseum.org/exhibitions and -events/events. So I really do encourage you to check that out because they have, beyond those two events, they have events going on all the time, events for families, parents and children, and all kinds of wonderful stuff. So please do check out their site. But to get back to what we're talking about today, I would first like to welcome Laurie Brewer. Laurie is the Associate Curator of Costume and Textiles. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about Laurie and her bio. Laurie Ann Brewer, Associate Curator in the Department of Costume and Textiles at the RISD Museum, where she recently presented The Art and Design of Spider Silk in 2019 and Beauty at Her Fingertips, Chinese Sleeve Bands from the Aldrich Collection in 2017. Previous exhibitions at the museum include Luminous Lace, Metallic Trims 1500 to Now in 2016, Golden Glamour, the Edith Stuyvesant Gary collection in 2015, Indie Style, Batiks for the International Market 2015, and Artist Rebel Dandy, Men of Fashion 2013 with Kate Irvin, and Queen of the Insects, The Art of the Butterfly 2009 to 10, and she's working on a forthcoming exhibition, Selkie Sedna, Circumpolar Fashions, which I believe she's going to be talking about today. Exploring the story of the sea goddess and the applications of sealskin, Inuit, and global dress. She also serves as a lecturer in the Theory and History of Art and Design department and in the Apparel Design department. And she was just talking about teaching a class, and I have worked with her on the on collection as well in New York. Prior to her post at RISD, she worked in the Textiles department at the Museum of Fashion Institute of Technology. She was awarded her MA in Museum Studies, Costume and Textiles from SUNY New York FIT, and her BA in Human Ecology from the College of the Atlantic. Her research often explores the intersections of nature and art, focusing on the ecology of fashion from the 19th century to the present day. In addition to her curatorial and teaching practices, she is an avid hand spinner, knitter, and paper maker, and we're so pleased to have her with us today. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you for having me. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen at this point. There we go. Can everyone hear? Give me a thumbs up with those wonderful emojis that we all use now on our screen if you can hear me and see my screen, lest I start prattling on and no one can see anything. Great, fantastic. All right, well, good afternoon and welcome. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today in this virtual community. And again, thanks to Claire and Institutional Engagement for inviting us to participate in RISD Weekend. This year marks 4 centuries since the voyage of the Mayflower. And as we head into a holiday weekend and Indigenous Peoples Day, I would like to consider the many voices of this land in our community. As such, I'd like to begin with a working and developing land acknowledgement for the RISD Museum. The RISD Museum is built on what is now called College Hill, the ancestral territory of the Narragansett people. Many Indigenous communities have moved through this area over hundreds of generations, and Indigenous people from many nations near and far, including the Northeastern Algonquin, continue to live, study, and work in Providence today. We, as museum staff, are committed to actively addressing in our daily work our shortcomings as their neighbors and the many violent legacies of colonialism. An acknowledgement of Native voices and histories is crucial to the work and our practice as we move forward to rectify the destructive past. And I'd like to add my personal land acknowledgement because I'm coming to you from Barrington, Rhode Island today. And so I would also like to acknowledge that I am here speaking to you as a settler colonizer, and my home is built on the lands of the Pokanoket people. I extend my respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous peoples and their ancestors whose rich histories and communities have lived here for thousands of generations in what is known today as Rhode Island. As I begin this lecture, I pay respect to the traditional territory of Somes and the Wampanoag and Pokanoket people, their elders past, present, and future. So today I'll be speaking to you about the most northern reaches of our globe. The Arctic spans over 14 million square kilometers in 8 countries. And while its landscape appears harsh and inhospitable to those of us living outside the extremes of the North, over 40 distinct cultural groups have not only lived in these regions, but they have prospered here for centuries. From indigenous food sovereignty to environmental racism and Arctic ecology, today I will discuss how my cataloging of and work to repatriate items housed in the RISD Museum is driven by an institutional commitment that art can disrupt colonial legacies. In this brief introduction, as Claire mentioned, to a forthcoming exhibition at the RISD Museum, over 60 works of art are being examined with cultural significance from circumpolar communities spanning from the Yup'ik in the Bering Sea to the Sámi of modern-day countries of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Many of the works in this exhibition were collected in the early 20th century, and in highlighting the material mastery and artistic legacy of these historic works will be a way to forefront the vital artistic practices of these living communities. Many of the communities in the circumpolar regions now face a critical juncture of their cultural and artistic legacies, exacerbated by the physical loss of their homes due to the most recent shrinking of the polar ice cap, and in the past, displacement and physical removal from their ancestral lands. The story and the journey of many of the items that are now in the RISD Museum actually begins with a seminal moment in the 19th century when the United States purchased Alaska in 1867 from Russia. President Andrew Johnson signed a treaty on May 28th, and Alaska was formally transferred to the United States on October 18th of 1867. Now, from that language alone, we already begin to address some of those colonial histories, that there was a monetary exchange of lands that were under the ownership or perceived ownership of two nations that were not acknowledging the indigenous residents of those areas. But for those of you that think this purchase was driven by gold, by national security, or by the salmon industry, no, it was a completely different commodity that spurred this purchase: seal. From the mid-19th century, developments in the processing of seal pelts, and in particular the dehairing process, led to an increased interest in this type of fur. And this is where my personal interest as a fashion historian and as someone who is interested in the animal products industry really started. And I began to look at the ecology and the ecological systems that the impact of this 19th century fur trade had. Swiftly after the purchase of Alaska by the United States, a formalized harvest of seals and the processing of pelts in the region came under the auspices of the US government. And it was one of the first times that the United States government managed a commercial enterprise for a fashion industry. Here you start to see the physical goods, the tangible, the tactile from the RISD Museum collections, and where my curiosity was piqued. So with this muff trademarked as Alaskan fur seal, so this was the US government certified product, they flooded the market. And we see in the associated painting a similar example of this style of muff worn by the sitter. Again, another certified Alaskan sealskin hat. This stamp was placed in products of US Alaskan sealskin. This one is coming to us from the Hoffenreffer family. But as the supply of pelts increased, so too did the public demand. And it led to the International Conservation and Wildlife Management Treaty of 1911. And this is a display that was put up by the Association of American Fur Designers in 1925 to really celebrate the work that the furriers and the US government had done to bring back the stocks and supplies after an embargo in the hunt in 1911. The popularity of sealskin remained strong through the 1920s, with advertisements focused on both the Pacific and North Atlantic trade. And similar styles from fashion illustrations of the era complete this story. There's both the dolman in the center that was given by Mrs. Murray Danforth, but I want you to pay particular note, and I'm going to just circle with my cursor here, the advertisements of the period, which might seem quite dissimilar from what we are used to in advertising, or quite shocking, the explicit nature of identifying the materiality. Here, introducing genuine baby sealskin. In this next slide, you see that trend continue. And we see an interest in the habitat of the seal and a deeply exoticized and colonial gaze at the indigenous populations who lived in contact with the seal. It is this type of advertisement that really piqued my interest to explore further beyond the fashion history, the US Alaskan seal trade, and look to the parallel history and use of seal in these same regions. Concurrent with my development of this exhibition idea, I embarked with my colleagues at the museum in a multi-year research cluster, the Americas Research Initiative. So this is one of the first items and an immensely important object to this story, because this carving tool is called an ulu. And this is what a woman who, upon entering into womanhood, when a young girl is moving into puberty, she often will be given her first ulu, and her ulu that will stay with her for life. And so we have this piece in the museum's collection that really begins to tell the story of Indigenous practices of processing and a synergistic use with the then sealskin populations. This next example that we're looking at here is a series, a small grouping. We have a male and a female figure, a small fox, and a pouch. This group comes to us from the New England Grenfell Association. Now, in beginning to do research as part of the Americas Research Initiative, it is the provenance of many of these objects that are really helping us to tell the story of these items. So what was the Grenfell Association, and how is this important? The Grenfell Association was a Christian charity organization, and the mission became the life's work of Dr. Wilfred T. Grenfell, where he sought to provide medical care to what was the perceived impoverished communities along Canada's isolated Atlantic coast. Many of those communities were in fact settler colonizer fishermen communities. And so there is a complicated story between the work of the Grenfell Association and subsequently the residential schools that sprung up in this area, started by the then Grenfell Association. Further, at the association, there were cooperative stores that sold items ranging from knitted objects to hooked rugs to Indigenous art, which in all likelihood, then this diminutive set of figures, beautifully incised and decorated and highlighted with pigments, could have come out of that type of workshop practice. Another piece that has been just an extraordinary moment of unpacking the hidden stories and histories of the objects all attendant to the seal trade is this piece that was created in the 1900s, where we have a combination of both aquatic leather, in all likelihood in this case a walrus leather, being used with ivory that again has been incised. You can see small seals decorating this toggle belt. And further enhancing it, you can see a fishing record. So both the spotting of the seals and the black dots that I will circle with my cursor are alluding to and documenting the hunt. You can even see here with my cursor again, two figures dragging a seal behind them. And here we have a fish that has been captured. A few more items in the collection that in many ways, thanks to my colleague Emily, who will also be speaking today as part of the Americas Research Initiative, we have been reuniting not only the histories, but the actual intent of objects in the collection. And so with this example showing two hunters in a gut-skin covered kayak from the Pacific Northwest Aleutian area, you see that on the original intake card, this was listed as a toy in our collections. A similar piece here, also from the Aleut Arctic Native American communities, possibly though moving towards Greenland for this example, but with the same, and I'll circle again with my cursor, maritime leather, the aquatic leather that is a seal gut material that is used as well for its waterproof qualities. This piece too had been categorized as a toy. That is in fact because many of these pieces had come into the museum collections quite early on as teaching pieces as part of the education department of the museum to help students in a community outreach. These objects were used to speak to the full expanse of the United States. These objects have now moved more officially and formally into the museum's collection as we begin to learn more and more about the histories of these objects. But now moving ahead to my current research and the exhibition proper. Although the objects that I've just shared with you also have a role in this exhibition, I'm really trying to develop and consider and think about what the relationship between these circumpolar communities and this archetype of the seal goddess, known as Sedna or Selkie in different communities. And I'm looking at the silhouette of a woman's parka, which has this long tail at the back, which enhanced and was actually made so that this large hood and then the tail at the back would be protective in nature from the harsh environment of the wearer, but also provide an area for a woman to snuggle her baby behind her. And so you can see with these three examples, a way in which I'm looking to the original garment, the traditional silhouette that is still worn till the present day, but then looking also at contemporary artists. Everything from an Icelandic design collaborative that works on knit pieces in the center, where they have reimagined the skin of the Selkie, that when the Selkie comes to land, she removes her seal skin and becomes a woman. And then on the far right of your screen, a piece from the fashion designer, American fashion designer, Tom Brown, where he's utilizing a fulled and boiled wool and looking at that silhouette. And also we can see a nod and consideration towards that original silhouette of the then indigenous, the Inuit parka. Some further avenues that the exhibition in its development might take will be to look at ways in which artists have been inspired by the ingenuity of Arctic and circumpolar materials. So again, back to the same type of seal gut, the bladder of the seal that was used traditionally as a float in the hunting of aquatic mammals. And you can see here in a print, or rather a sketch from the museum's collection, graphite. In the graphite drawing is actually showing us this very same then example of a seal gut being dried out at the summer camp from Cape Dorset. In the center, we see then a contemporary artist who is right now active in Southern Ontario. He is looking at the use of the seal bladder, but has reinterpreted it. Kozijn van Hoevelen is his name, and he has reinterpreted the seal as this then wonderful mylar balloon that he has done in installations. We also have an example of another contemporary artist, Marianne Schotel, looking at a parka, the traditional style of garment, but using Tyvek as a waterproof supplicant for the animal gut. The story of sealskin and the use of sealskin in Western fashion is, of course, a highly debated and highly fraught topic, and one that many opinions are really surrounding, and it is an impassioned story. But we see that actually for the indigenous communities in 1982, when the official ban on sealskins came into place, it had an immensely detrimental impact on indigenous communities, to the degree that many seal hunters found their income plummeting from $54,000 to $1,000. So we see in the subsequent years, from the banning of sealskin as a fashion material for non-indigenous communities, different steps that different artists within the circumpolar region have been taking to readdress and reassert their use of this material. And so this example from 1998 is actually when a Danish designer became the head of Versace after Gianni Versace's passing. And he created this collection called the Sustainable Cultural Heritage Collection to highlight sealskin as a material. We also have most recently films and documentary research going on by the excellent filmmaker Althea Arnak Baril, who produced the series Angry Inuk, talking about this complex relationship between Indigenous communities and their right to not only materials, but food sovereignty and the use of seal products in their practice. It is in 2009, the European ban on seal products really perpetuated an economic injustice towards the use for Indigenous communities for sealskins, to the effect that the previous film, Angry Inuk, that I was just showing you a slide of, really documents this challenge where Indigenous peoples have traveled to Brussels to try to then protest these type of bans on their use of the material. Further, I hope to really underscore for communities and for both RISD students and our greater audiences, highlighting ways in which Indigenous practitioners are continuing in a very much so active and ongoing use of this material, so spanning from Greenland all the way to then our Yup'ik communities on the Pacific and Bering Sea. And so this is just a brief overlay and summary of some of the work that I have been doing, prompted by museum collection items, but really telling so many more stories beyond just this one moment in the history of sealskin. So thank you for your time today, and it was my pleasure to share this project with you.
Thank you, Laurie, for that. That was awesome, super interesting. I also want to remind everyone that if you have questions for Laurie, or you have questions that arise while Emily's presenting, or things that Laurie discussed that you want to ask about, please feel free to put them in the question and answer at the bottom of your screen now. And when Emily is done with her presentation, we'll be going through them, and Emily and Laurie will answer them. So you don't need to hold on to them. If you'd like to put them in now so you don't forget, please feel free to do that. So I want to welcome Emily Banas, who's Assistant Curator of Decorative Arts and Design. Emily holds an MA in Decorative Arts, Design History, and Material Culture from the Bard Graduate Center, and an MA in Art History and Museum Studies from Georgetown University. She joined the RISD Museum in 2015 and specializes in 20th and 21st century decorative arts, craft, and design. Welcome, Emily.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you to Institutional Engagement for having me. It's really exciting to have an opportunity to share some of the work that I'm doing with the RISD Museum. And I'm gonna go ahead and pull up my screen. Oops. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about an aspect of museum work that a lot of people aren't aware of, and that's how acquisitions happen, how artworks are actually brought into the museum's collection. And I'm going to do this by focusing on one particular area of our collection, and that is jewelry. There are a lot of objects in the museum's collection, as Claire mentioned. There are about 100,000, and some people probably have no idea, how did they all get here? Well, I'm here to tell you that there are really two ways that objects enter the museum's collection. They are either given to us as gifts or they are purchased. We have a formal approval process, just like every other museum, by which artwork is proposed for acquisition and brought into the collection. And that is that 4 times a year, curators have an opportunity to present proposals for gifts and purchases to come into the collection. Every curator and every department has some kind of strategy for how they want to build their collection, whether they are working towards an exhibition and acquiring objects for that project. They might be filling gaps in their collection, or a lot of the times we're thinking about what would be useful to RISD faculty and students to look at. You know, we bring things out a lot for classes. Unfortunately, not currently with the pandemic, but normally we host lots of RISD classes in the museum and students get an opportunity to look really closely at objects. So we're always thinking about how different departments can utilize the objects in our collection. When we bring new objects into the museum, we're really making a commitment to care for them and to make them available to our audiences. And that takes a lot of time and money and space. So we have to think really intentionally about what we bring into the museum, because it's going to be here long after we are. With that in mind, I want to share a little overview of the jewelry in the museum and talk about how gifts and purchases have shaped this particular collection. And then I'll share some new purchases and a new project that we have coming up. So to give you a bit of an idea of what's in the collection, Decorative Arts and Design is one of the biggest departments at the museum. We have about 27,000 objects in total, which is a lot of objects, and jewelry makes up really the smallest portion of this collection. There are only 811 pieces of jewelry. We also have ceramics, metalwork, furniture, design drawings, wallpaper. So really a huge collection of decorative arts and design material. But the jewelry specifically represents American and European jewelry from the medieval period to contemporary. So a really wide range of objects. And they also represent an array of materials, not just metal, but also wood, glass, paper, and plastics. I recently published a guide to the jewelry collection that you can find on the museum's website under projects and publications. So some of what I'm going to share is outlined in this document, but I hope you will check it out after this program to learn a little bit more about the jewelry collection. To give you some context for what's in the collection, I'm going to share a few highlights. And I just want to point out on this particular image, I have the image of a back of the piece, and I'm going to share an image of the front very shortly. But if you see this number that's right here, that's what's known as an accession number. And every single one of our objects gets an accession number, and it's actually on each object. And this represents the first part is the year the object came into the collection, which was 2003, and this was the 82nd object to come into the collection. So just a little fun fact for you. Some of the earliest types of jewelry to come into the RISD Museum's collection were in 1902, and these were Victorian era pieces that were made of or with hair. You heard me correctly, they are made of or with hair. Jewelry could sometimes be made of hair from someone who was deceased or from a living person. And jewelry made from the hair of the deceased is known as mourning jewelry. So we have 2 examples here, and they are distinguished by symbols of death and mourning, sometimes skulls, urns, weeping willow trees, or images of mourners, as you'll see with these 2 pieces. They can also contain inscriptions with names, dates, and messages about the departed. And Jewelry that is made of hair can also be a token of love and sentimentality, not necessarily from someone who has died. So I show you these two pieces here. You know, a mother could have jewelry that was made from the hair of her children or her husband, and a father could have maybe cufflinks with pieces of hair woven into them from his wife or children. So the spirit of this jewelry is really about remembrance, remembering somebody who has passed, or really keeping somebody that you care for very much close to you. And these are some of my favorite pieces in the collection. They're very unique. They come out a lot for classes, and people are just fascinated by how these are woven with the hair. And so I want you to remember these pieces because I'm going to come back to them in a little bit in my presentation. But as I noted, objects that come into the collection are either given to us or they're purchased. And for many decades, the jewelry collection was formed solely through gifts. And this may sound ideal, but many of them contain a large number of objects. And throughout the history of the museum, we haven't always had the sufficient resources to catalog them properly. So while we do a lot of work to bring new objects into the collection, there's also a lot of time conducting research on objects that came in a long time ago. Some other highlights of our collection include European jewelry, particularly Italian, and we have some high quality examples of these jewelries in different materials and techniques, such as micromosaic, which you'll see on the left. And this is actually made out of tiny, tiny pieces of colored glass called tesserae, and they're assembled into these different patterns that are really spectacular. And on the right, we have carved lava. And these represent the types of objects that would have been purchased as souvenirs by people during their European travels, known as grand tours during the 18th and 19th century. Some of the earliest jewelry makers were silversmiths, and the Gore Manufacturing Company of Rhode Island, which was once one of the largest silver manufacturers in the world, got their start in 1831 selling handmade spoons and small items, including jewelry. Now, these are very elaborate, and their designs really evolved as the company evolved to include metalwork with enamel and fine gemstones, and also designs that were informed by popular styles, such as Japanese design. And here you'll see the front of that brooch that I showed you earlier. There were very few purchases of jewelry made for the museum's collection until about the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a new emphasis on collecting what was contemporary and representative of its time. One of our collecting mandates is to collect works for the museum that were made by RISD faculty and alumni, and we have a small but growing collection of both. Here on the left are a pair of earrings made by RISD Jewelry and Metalsmithing faculty member Barbara Seidnath. And on the right, we have this great necklace by Bernhard Schompinger when he was a artist in residence at the RISD Jewelry and Metalsmithing department. He actually made this necklace called RISD Trash, made of pieces that he found that were cast off in the RISD Metalsmithing studio. So a really fun connection to that department. Sometimes gifts of art come directly from artists, and that's the case with a recent gift by 8 pieces of jewelry by the artist Betty Cook. Betty, who turned 96 this year, was still producing jewelry a few years ago when we acquired these works from her. Back in the 1950s, when the studio jewelry movement was heavily concentrated in New York City, and the majority of well-known designers were men, Betty was working in Baltimore, Maryland, making equally wonderful jewelry as the designers in New York City who were often better known than she was. Her jewelry is simple, elegant, and is often accented with stones and wood and enamel. And as you can see here on the left, this necklace was made by her in 2018 based on a design from the 1970s. She really has an affinity for circles and half moon shapes, and also shapes that are inspired by bird forms. And we actually had the opportunity to select the works that we wanted from her. So this was a great chance to get a range of materials and styles and works that represent different decades of the artist's career. Our jewelry collection is in no way comprehensive. We do not have every period in history or even every style represented. And this, of course, presents some challenges when we think about how we want to build the collection. Do we want to build it comprehensively and collect every style of jewelry that we can? Ideally, we do, but that does take a lot of time and money. And one of the best places to really start collecting is what's happening right now. So recently we made a decision to focus on collecting jewelry by living artists that really represent this moment in history and time. In 2018, the curatorial staff began to re-examine our collecting priorities, and we came up with a set of guidelines for the artworks that we want to bring into the collection that really reflect our values as an institution. And all new purchases have to meet one or more criteria that we've laid out, including be a work by a RISD faculty or alumni, a Rhode Island artist, be a work that responds to current issues, an object that can be used for teaching and learning by RISD faculty and students, and most importantly, works that are created by underrepresented artists, including artists of color, particularly Black and Indigenous artists, women, and LGBTQ+ identifying individuals. So the first of two exciting recent purchases that I want to share with you is a necklace made by the artist Joyce J. Scott. Joyce is an African-American visual and performing artist. She is a printmaker, a weaver, a sculptor, and a storyteller, but she has become quite well known for her work in jewelry. We already had two works by the artist in the collection, one in contemporary art and one in our Department of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs, but not in decorative arts. So this, I felt, was a great opportunity to collect and show the different ways that one artist works across mediums. In terms of its technique, this necklace is unlike anything that is in our collection or was in our collection previously. It's made of woven glass beads, and it uses a technique, Joyce uses a technique called peyote stitch, and this has its roots in many Native American cultures. So it's really an opportunity to talk about making and how making and techniques are translated across cultures and time periods. When you purchase a work from a living artist, you often have a few examples to choose from, and there were so many wonderful examples of necklaces that Joyce makes that we could have acquired, but this one particularly stood out to me because of its striking three-dimensional figures. And Joyce uses the color blue in this work to represent water, which you can see kind of swirls around the figures and links them together. And I just love this work. Its title is called Family, and I think it brings up some really interesting conversations about race and how we define family, and really what does it mean that we have these two groups of figures that are on different sides but are connected in the middle. The second new acquisition is by Sonya Clark, and it is titled Hair Necklace for Chain. Sonya is an artist of Jamaican and Trinidadian heritage who uses the medium of hair prominently in her work as a way of understanding individuality, race constructions, and how notions of beauty in relation to hair have shaped the African American community. Having studied textile design, she connects the art of weaving hair to that of weaving thread. So as you can see, again, we have hair, and this has very strong connections with our historic hair jewelry. But unlike those pieces, which were made of the hair of just one person, this necklace is actually made from the hair of the artist and her family and her friends. So it's really imbued with this wonderful sense of community. And in contrast to the Victorian hair jewelry, which is highly processed, washed, and straightened in order to be woven into these very specific styles, Sonya's necklace contains hair that has been twisted into these links, but the quality is still natural. And when you look at it, you can really understand the material and know that it's made of hair. So this has so many wonderful connections to our historic collections, but also allows us to think about hair and identity in a contemporary sense. As opposed to purchasing a finished work, one of the ways that we can bring artwork into the collections is through commissions. And this is a really exciting opportunity to get to work with a living artist and have a work that's made specifically for the museum. So under the category of future acquisitions, we have Lucy Jockle. Lucy is a alumna from the RISD Jewelry and Metalsmithing Department from 2016. And again, her work has very strong connections to the Victorian mourning culture. She explores the ephemeral and the fragility of life and the environment in her work using animal bones and bees' wings to tell these stories through her jewelry. I was incredibly struck by Lucy's work using bee wings, which you can see here. And originally we had intended to purchase a finished work from her, but after this winter, there were several hives of bees that were maintained by RISD that did not survive. And I got the idea to honor these bees by having Lucy create a new work for the collection. So while I can't disclose the specific plans for this new work, it is very much inspired by works in the collection and similar to some of the pieces that you'll see here. And I want to just end with this video so you can really understand the nature of the bee's wings as a material that is incredibly fragile, but so beautiful. And I think that's a great place to end. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was beautiful. And I can't wait to see what the work is that comes out of the commission. I was wondering if both of you could talk to a little bit about both in a normal time and in COVID times, how the museum connects with the college and how you work with different departments and how the students access the collections, you know, both normally and now in these times. And I know also, Laurie, you teach in apparel, but just in apparel and in other departments, how that all works.
Sure thing. It's actually, so it's been a really dynamic time, and we've been navigating this online and virtual realm of really looking to ways to continue to keep those bonds with the students. So in a pre-COVID RISD universe, many of our departments have both official times that students can come in for one-on-one collection visits, but Emily and I are also incredibly active with teaching classes for faculty members. So classes will come in and either request collection pieces, or even curators will speak to items that are on view with classes. So that would be in the pre-COVID era, how that relationship would work. But then something that's actually been a really exciting transformation into this era of remote learning has been a way that we've been able to segue. And so working with the museum's education department, and in particular, our colleagues, Alexandra Podorak and Deb Clemens, we have set up a whole series of office hours. So we've moved beyond just the traditional a student request coming in to see X number of objects. And we now have even increased access for all the museum staff. So everyone from curatorial to exhibitions to the education department, students can now set up visits to just chat, ask ideas, questions, brainstorm with museum staff. But then we also, for those collection-based visits, we've been utilizing really rich photography. I can't say highly enough how great it's been to have our museum photographer and our digital assets management team. We've been able to really utilize some great photography. And so even though we can't get to the objects right now, because we're working from home, we are able to really tell those stories.
I think Laurie summed it up really nicely, so I will just second what she said about the photography. I think we have been able to really zoom in and see so many great details that somehow, we can't even see in person when we have classes. And also, this has been a really great opportunity to share our resources on our website with faculty and students, and really help everyone learn how to navigate the resources that we have available, which I think will serve everyone very well, even after COVID.
You're muted, Claire.
I'm sorry. I have a question from Norma Sarkeesian. She said, born and raised in Rhode Island presently, do you offer any hands-on programs in the high school art programs?
Well, both Emily and I, because we're not directly implanted in the education department of the museum, but I do know that my colleagues, so we have both a youth and teen teacher and learning program. And so I would definitely advocate that, or suggest folks should reach out to our website, because I know that numerous site visits are made, and with some of the clubs that the museum also offers and hosts for local high school students, where it's an ongoing year-long program. Those students, it's both learning more about the museum, the works on view, but also a lot of hands-on activities. So definitely check out the website, and we can even try to get some information into the chat about those programs.
Fantastic. I'm also wondering, with COVID now, how does that change your planning for like the exhibition that you're working on, Laurie? How has that changed at all your planning on acquisitions and just thinking about your collections? I'm just curious how that's affected the work that you're doing now.
That's a great question, Claire. It really impacted in a way plans that I had for actually this past summer, where I had put in actually for funds. So RISD is an amazing institution that you can put in for research and travel funds to help support the development of exhibitions. And I was going to be traveling to both Alaska, Sweden, and Iceland on sabbatical this summer to be able to build firsthand relationships with Indigenous practitioners. With COVID, that those trips were postponed. That said, the Zoomiverse has just been this amazing opportunity that now I can guilt-free. I have no carbon, or a very small carbon footprint for my internet usage. And I was able to attend workshops, an amazing series called the De-Isolation series, was then based out of Inuit Futures in the Arts out of Canada, as well as I've been able to log on to some programming with the Anchorage Museum. So in essence, I've been able to continue building those relationships and actually having dialogues with communities that I might not have even been able to make it to because they're so very remote. So there are certain advantages. That said, because, you know, being a fashion and textile historian, I definitely want to go meet firsthand with makers and be able to, you know, experience that type of research. But so we're thinking again of, like you said, just it's pivoting, thinking of different ways, and really finding, I think, some advantages to how we can work during this time.
And I will say that it certainly has been a challenge for all of us who are planning exhibitions and rotations, because most of us haven't seen the objects that we're working with for months. And if we do want to go into the museum, we have to, you know, have a very specific purpose. We can't go in on a regular basis. So it does make the opportunities that we have to access the collection all the more special when we get to see those things in person. But really the pandemic has given, I think, some of us an opportunity to really step back and, you know, give us a moment to think critically about our collections and how we want to move forward with exhibitions and also acquisitions. And like I said, you know, think really intentionally about, you know, the future of our collections and the types of artists and the types of objects that we want to include that are really important and speak to this time that we're in.
Fantastic. So one more question, and then if anybody has any last questions, we're going to wrap up soon. So just make sure that you get them into the Q&A. Otherwise, this will be our last question. Oh, somebody just entered one in. When are students expected to have full access to the museum? I don't know if you can answer that or not.
Well, students currently are allowed to visit the museum. We have quite a few days and hours. In fact, we're actually open extended hours right now to students and faculty, so they can visit the museum and see anything that's on view. At this time, we're not sure whether, you know, when we're going to be able to have students back in for classes in the museum with objects that we bring out from storage. I think we would all love that to be in the spring, but we don't know for sure yet.
Right. So now they have general viewing access, but it's like timed, right? They have to set up appointments, so there's a limited amount of people, or they can just come in.
So faculty are encouraged to make appointments. Students can actually come in anytime.
Okay. Great. And someone is asking about donations. Do you take donations from the, well, I know you talked a little bit, Emily, about that. Is there a contact person, or how does that process work?
That's a great question. And yes, much of the museum is built actually on donations, not acquisitions. And it's because there have just been so many families within the Providence area that have really built those collections. So yes, we very much so do still love donations. The caveat being, again, during the pandemic, because we're not on site right now, the coordination is a little bit more challenging to be bringing things to the museum in this present period. But folks can always reach out to via both our director's office, but also through then our curatorial hub. So all those emails are information. You can find that on the website. And that's the first way, is to just reach out. If you're able to take photographs of objects, that really helps the curators out, because really the criteria that we're looking for with any donation is to see if it is bringing a different technique, a different type of material, a different artist to the collections that we do not have represented. And so those types of photographs or information are immensely helpful when starting that conversation. But yes, we love donations.
We had a tour with the Nature Lab, and Betsy Ruppa, who manages the upstairs area, said, if you have a bobcat skull and we already have 15 bobcat skulls, then, we just can't take that. I think it's a little different at the museum, but
Betsy, I tried to just give her an opossum and she wouldn't take it. No, she said we have possums aplenty.
Opossums aplenty. I'm going to save that for my next poem title. Thank you so much, both of you, Emily and Laurie, for joining us today. This is really wonderful, and it's just really illuminating and exciting to see all the wonderful work that you're doing and the items that you're bringing into the collection. So again, thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.